Hey everybody, welcome to It's Not Scary, It's Just Music. It's me, SJ. Hey, welcome to another episode in our Season 2 finale series in which we're walking through major genre groups across the entirety of the 1990s. In today's episode, we're talking about underground rock music from the West. So this is different than popular rock music from the West, and obviously we'll go into that in greater detail as we move along. But if you're interested in listening to that Western popular rock music episode in our recap series or any others, you can check those out as well. Additionally, if you're interested in listening to any of the music that I talk about in today's episode, you could check out the playlist that I've linked in the description of the episode here. And finally, if you're looking for my big list for all of the 1990s in which I've pulled together all of the most impactful, important, meaningful, best songs, in my opinion, from all of the 1990s, it'll be dropping in conjunction with the last episode in this recap series dropping. So keep an eye out for that too. So, what are we going to be talking about today? First, we're going to review what we recapped in the 1980s for rock music, probably again. I think we already did it in the popular rock side, but we'll do it again just to make sure that we hit it, just like all the other episodes. And next, we're going to overview the subgenres that we'll be discussing today, and then dive into each subgenre with milestone songs across the decade and why we chose them. So let's start off with discussing what we recapped in rock music for the 1980s once again, just in case you didn't listen to the popular rock side, or now that we're getting the other side of it, you get to hear the difference. We started at the beginning with Queen, Another One Bites the Dust. Then we moved to the Psychedelic Furs, Pretty in Pink. Then U2's Sunday Bloody Sunday. Then Gene Loves Jezebel's Always a Flame. Then Sonic Youth, Tom Violence. Next, Dinosaur Jr.'s Sludge Feast. Next, Pixies, Where Is My Mind? And finally, Nirvana, About a Girl. You probably heard across that list that there was a big mix there between popular rock music and underground rock music. There was so much rock that was happening as we were going into the late 80s that things started to transition and focus a little bit more on that underground rock side and a little less on the popular rock side. So as we went into the 1990s, there just was so much rock music that was happening in this decade that we needed to split it up between popular rock and underground rock. So what do we mean by that? Let's first talk about the subgenres that we discussed in the popular rock side, just for frame of reference. So on the popular rock side, we discussed grunge, post-grunge, neo-Brit rock, retro and neo-roots rock, and neo-psychedelic rock. So that was what we discussed on the popular rock side for Western culture. In the underground side, though, we're going to be talking about alternative rock, garage rock, indie rock, and slowcore, sadcore, shoegaze. Two totally different flavors. One you probably found on college radio and underground radio. One you found on the everyday FM radio. There was so much rock music that was happening in the 90s, like I said, that there was enough space for all of it. So where we've already discussed Western popular rock music in a different recap series episode, today we're talking about, like I said, alternative rock and all of its shapes and forms, garage rock, indie rock, and slowcore, sadcore, shoegaze. I have bunched them all up together, the slowcore, sadcore, shoegaze, just because they're all approximately in the same space. There's minute differences between them, but for the most part, they're all kind of in the same geography. So let's start off by talking about alternative rock. So we've talked at length about alternative rock over the course of the 80s season and the 90s season, just because of how critically important it has been to the evolution of rock music, at least in Western society, and then permeating into Eastern cultures as well after a time. Because as we discussed, at least in season 2 of the 1990s, alternative rock created all of these offshoots of rock music like garage rock, indie rock, and the like. And then those genres spiraled off into their own varieties of pop music. And then that's not even speaking to the Western popular rock side, because alternative rock absolutely did birth grunge rock into existence, which then led to post-grunge. I'm absolutely certain that it led to the roots rock movement. Like, alternative rock basically created all of this stuff. And the four waves that it experienced all the way leading up to 1999, let's just say, each had their own distinctive flavor, their own distinctive vibe, but they all were building off of one another. So to start off with, we'll at least ground ourselves talking about how in the 1980s we discussed Sonic Youth, Dinosaur Jr., Pixies, and Nirvana, all of which leaned very heavily into the second wave of alternative rock, where the first wave was more REM and Husker Du, and that was even earlier back into the 80s. So as we start here in the 1990s, we're going to begin in 1991 with the album Green Mind by Dinosaur Jr., which we definitely talked about in the 1991 episode, and the track is Puke Puke and Cry. And this is still technically considered second wave, but it's very much on the way to third wave. The way that you could tell that this is second wave is that it's still got some attacking guitars behind it. It's not necessarily lightened up, and the guitars are starting to get played inappropriately in an ironic sort of way. But the singing is starting to get a little bit off tone and atonal and off tone and off pace in Puke and Cry. And so because of that, it is starting to lean into that third wave, which does have that distinctive atonal sound, which you can find in our next track, which comes 3 years later, which definitely is the third wave already of alternative rock by Pavement, unsurprising, on their album Crooked Rain, again, unsurprising, and the track is Silence Kid. So we definitely talked about this album in the 94 episode, and we highlighted Silence Kid also as a critical track on that album for that year. You can hear the connection point between Puke and Cry and Silence Kid, most specifically in how they're singing. So you can tell and understand that even though in a vacuum you might not be able to detect that either one of these specifically are alternative rock or that one leads to the other, but if you hear them right up against each other, you can definitely hear how Pavement is absolutely an alternative rock band that is just bringing forward what Dinosaur Jr. was playing with in 1991, what Pixies was playing with in 1990, 92, and taking a couple different approaches to it in which the instrument playing is a little bit more off kilter. It's a little bit more atonal. It sounds a little bit more disjointed. The singing is obviously more disjointed, more atonal. And so one might say, well, how is it that we're classifying this evolution here because it sounds so distinctly different? And the thing is, this is just the nature of alternative rock, that it just continued to evolve in these really aggressively intriguing, interesting ways. And they do all connect to each other, and the community itself is cohesive. It's just the experimentation is so wild that it's oftentimes difficult to really predict where alternative rock is going to go next. And a great way to articulate that is 2 years later, we do get to the fourth wave of alternative rock with the album Hissing Prigs and Static Couture by Brainiac, and the track is Vincent Come On Down, which we also talked about in the 1996 episode as an essential album and track. Again, you might hear this track and go, how is this related to Pavement? This sounds almost completely different. They sound distinctly different from each other. How is this connected? And the reality is that in 1994, with Silence Kid, Pavement was playing with some really interesting ideas in which they were going even harder into that atonal mindset. By 1995, the Pavement sound was starting to evolve into more distinctly indie rock directions, but there were other bands on the alternative rock scene that were starting to lean more into heavier, more retro metal ideas. And the atonal was becoming a little less pronounced, and it was focused more on kind of a shout singing approach. And that's where Brainiac's Vincent Come On Down really flourished in 1996, when it was sort of official that we were in the fourth wave. Kind of like how with Dinosaur Jr.'s Puke and Cry, it was technically still second wave because it was hearkening back to earlier ideas that Dinosaur Jr. and Sonic Youth and Pixies were playing with in 88, 89, 90. But in 1991, there was that inflection point where that atonal sound started to make its way more so into the music. And so that's why it's like at the very, very end of second wave. So where Silence Kid is more kind of in the middle of third wave, and by 1995, we're starting to get out of the atonal idea and get more into the shout singing approach. And that's where Vincent Come On Down is more relevant. And then by 1998, we're getting towards the end of the fourth wave of alternative rock with Royal Trucks' Accelerator, and the track is The Banana Question. It sounds very much like Vincent Come On Down. It's definitely got more of those retro metal ideas to it that sounds like maybe it was a little bit 80s, maybe not. It also sounds like it's underground 60s rock music. It's got a lot going on. I mean, Royal Trucks is genius rock music personified because they were just throwing so many wonderful ideas together and it all kind of worked. And it was obviously driving forward a whole new approach in the split off of garage rock. But you could really hear how these aggressive evolutions took place in alternative rock over the course of the decade, where if you played The Banana Question and Puke and Cry right up against each other, Puke and Cry just sounds completely simplistic. It even sounds more like first wave alternative rock, like REM style alternative rock by comparison, where The Banana Question is way, 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 way out there. It's completely evolved alternative rock into this totally new, different, distinctive thing, blasting off into the future. This is to say, too, that I'm extremely curious to know and understand where a fifth wave might be, or if alternative rock eventually stops being a distinctive thing and we get more garage rock waves and indie rock waves that just carry the torch forward, and alternative rock as an idea starts to fade away. Who can say? I can't say because I don't know and I don't remember, but I'm excited for us to get into the 2000s to hear just how much this genre that keeps on giving and keeps on leading the charge on what underground rock music can and should be delivers next. I'm just excited to figure that out. Speaking of garage rock, we're going to go into that one next. And it mostly happened towards the end of the decade. And as I said a second ago, it's basically an offshoot off of the fourth wave of alternative rock, except it goes even more metal. And I'd like to believe that albums like Hissing Prigs and Static Couture by Brainiac in 96 were ushering in what was possible around garage rock before garage rock became a thing. Because if you look up Brainiac, there might be some hints they were early proto garage rock, but I think for the most part they're equated with alternative rock plus punk maybe, which sure, but I also think that this idea of garage rock absolutely spun off from whatever they were doing and other bands like them in 96, 97. So that's actually where we're going to start in 1997 with The Lonesome Crowded West by Modest Mouse, and the track is Shitlock. And it is in 1997, and it is the first wave of garage rock. So when we say garage rock and when we say it's fourth wave, but it is just going metal, the way that you could understand garage rock, unless I tell you, just think about the White Stripes, because that's later stage garage rock, probably second wave, is that it's very, very crackly. Like the guitar work is coming out of the amplifiers and the speakers so loudly that it just sounds like it's just crackling and there's tons of static behind it and you could barely understand what they're saying. Another really great example of garage rock, if you want to dig into one of my big lists, is the artist 68 Comeback and their album A Bridge to Effin' Far. They also do a really excellent job of displaying really, really early garage rock because you could barely understand what they're saying because it's just their mouths are all over the microphone and they're just shouting into it, these lyrics. And it's really hard to tell sometimes what they're saying because of just how loud they're turning everything up. And that's the vibe of garage rock. It's just you and your band in your garage just wailing on guitars, thrashing your drums, and just shouting the ever-loving death into your microphone. And it doesn't even hardly matter what you're playing or what you're singing about. It's just this loudness. It's loudness. So that's garage rock. And the track Shitlock by Modest Mouse does a really great job of teeing that up because it's the very early markers of what I would classify as official garage rock, which is distinctive than alternative rock. You can hear in this track that you've got the aggressive guitar work, you've got the aggressive singing, you've got the off-kilter where it sounds like this was third or fourth wave alternative rock 20 minutes ago. Like it's right on the cusp, but it is kicked over into this more distinctive sounding thing that isn't strictly just alternative rock. It's different. It's as if it's been cleaned up since Vincent Come On Down, for example. So that's why it's a good way for us to start garage rock. Then 1 year later, so at the same time as Royal Truck's Accelerator came out, Sparkle Horse came out with Good Morning Spider, and the track is Pig. So we're still in the first wave. We're basically going to be in the first wave throughout the entirety of the 90s because this is just the beginning of garage rock for the most part. I think probably we won't get to the second wave until White Stripes right at the beginning of the 2000s. So Pig sounds even more like whatever Modest Mouse was doing the year before or what Royal Trucks was doing or what Brainiac was doing. It just sounds even more like that. But again, it's a more fully realized idea. It's more cohesive. It's got more of a perspective. It sounds, again, more cleaned up. And it's delivering a very particular sound. Pig very much sounds like its own thing, where Shitlock maybe was still playing with alternative rock ideas. Pig sounds maybe only 10% alternative rock at this point. It's going in much more distinctive directions. And then finally in 1999, so we're just hitting 1 year. In 1999, we're getting to the end of the first wave of garage rock with Royal Trucks again on Veterans of Disorder, and the track is Water Park. This sounds, first of all, like an evolution off of the Banana Question, and it's definitely moving even further in those garage rock directions, going down that path. One thing I'll say too is that on Veterans of Disorder, there was a variation between tracks that were fourth wave alternative rock, late stage, and these late stage first wave garage rock ideas, which says to me that they were so close to one another that it's possible that we didn't actually get to a definitive understanding about what garage rock was and how distinctive it was from alternative rock until we got to bands like the White Stripes in the second wave, where it was just so much of its own thing that we don't have albums that were switching between it being fourth wave alternative rock or first wave garage rock, and they just keep going back and forth because those little minute differences aren't really as detectable to the artists. Or they're trying to bridge that gap and say, we're bringing some of the alternative rock ideas in so you can listen to those, but we're also trying to show you this new thing, which is garage rock, that takes it just a hair further, and it's a little bit different of a perspective, so you can follow us on that line of logic too. So maybe it was on purpose, maybe it wasn't, but if nothing else, in 1998-99, there was definitely this switching going back and forth on a lot of these garage rock albums where it was a little bit alternative rock sometimes, it was a little bit garage rock sometimes. And you might say to yourself, SJ, how are you telling the difference then between some of these tracks if they sound so similar to one another? And the truth is that when it comes to garage rock, it's just more polished. It sounds like the perspective on the garage rock being that crackly sound, really leaning into your microphone and doing that. It's just a little bit more controlled and a little bit more on purpose, because that's the thing about fourth wave alternative rock. It's a little less on purpose. It's more just them aggressively experimenting, and whatever comes out, comes out. And for garage rock, it's a little bit more on purpose, and that's how you can tell the difference. So that was alternative rock and garage rock. So now let's talk about indie rock. So indie rock came about as a result, some might say, of the second or third wave of alternative rock, because the timing kind of lines up. So at the very beginning of the 90s, indie rock was emerging as this jokey idea, I think to a certain extent, in which people in the alternative rock scene were becoming either disillusioned with, disinterested in, or what have you. The strictly Pixies ideas of delivering college rock music, let's just say, or Dinosaur Jr. or Sonic Youth. They wanted to go in this different direction. And that different direction took us into this softer, more hipster direction where alternative rock was much more firmly post-punk counterculture offshoot. Indie rock was taking it in a more melodic direction that was caked in deeper levels of intellectual irony than alternative rock was, where alternative rock was playing, for example, third wave alternative rock, ironically, where the singing was atonal or the guitar work was disjointed and the beats were disjointed. Like, that was more counterculture irony. We're not going to do things the way that you want us to do them. We're going to do them this different way. Indie rock was a little bit more subverting expectations by being melodic, but also generally deciding that they were going to go their own way and be a little bit more intellectual with their subversion of culture or approaching counterculture. And so if you want to think about alternative rock being like a rock and roll band t-shirt and indie rock being a hipster, that's the different vibes that you took. So the indie rock side was a little bit more full of itself, and alternative rock was just trying to aggressively push back against the establishment. That was the distinct directions. Fortunately for us, we have a very, very, very perfect example to start off with for talking about indie rock. I would say it's probably the best track that could ever possibly be used to articulate the journey of any of these genres across this entire series. So it's just the best one. And it's from 1991, and it's by Sebado on their album 3, and the track is called Gimme Indie Rock. Like, there it is. And the thing is, what you need to do right now, and I'll wait, is turn this off and go listen to Gimme Indie Rock. Just listen to it, because it'll tell you the entire story of what I just told you right now about the journey of indie rock coming into existence, except it's a song. Just listen to the thought process that Sebado goes through singing this song about Gimme Indie Rock. That's the story of how indie rock came about. Period. That's it. I mean, I just told it to you, essentially, but stop listening to me right now and go listen to this track, and then come back to me. I'll wait a second. Okay, you back? So in case you didn't actually go listen to it, I do recommend that you probably go listen to it right now. But if you don't, just listen to this track. You can hear it that there was this desire in the alternative rock space to do something else, do something different, to, I think as they say, smoke weed more and chill out more and not take your counterculture driving force so seriously. But I also do want to revolt a little bit, because I don't want to go so hard, but I could also still revolt a little bit and chill. So that's what indie rock is. It's revolution, kind of. It's like revolution light, because we just don't want to go this hard, but we do also think that pop culture is stupid. So it's just the chill version of alternative rock, essentially. So Gimme Indie Rock. It's a great track, by the way, but it is just the best way to kick this off. There isn't a better one, frankly, ever. So 3 years later, we get to the second wave of indie rock with the Blue album by Weezer, and the track is Buddy Holly. Again, I don't know that you could necessarily get a more perfect track to articulate what indie rock is about, especially because this idea of the Buddy Holly, Mary Tyler Moore vibe that Weezer is talking about in Buddy Holly is just the hipster persona, period. It just is. That's literally it. If you want to talk about what a hipster is, was, continues to be, it's this song in person form. That's it. And it's second wave. So Gimme Indie Rock still sounds a little bit more alternative rock. Second wave, alternative rock, Dinosaur Jr., Pixies. Weezer, Buddy Holly, nope. It's very casual revolution, right? We're going to do what we want to do. We're going to look how we want to look. We're going to sound like how we want to sound. And I don't really care about anything else beyond that because I'm just living my life and you can't tell me what to do because this is how I'm doing counterculture. That's just it. That's the whole song about Buddy Holly. That's it. And then you move 2 years into the future with the third wave. So there's a lot of evolutions of indie rock over the course of the 90s. There's a lot going on here. 2 years later, 1996, for the third wave, the artist is Cake, the album is Fashion Nugget, and the track is Friend is a four-letter word. It's taking what Buddy Holly was doing, obviously. I mean, just listen to the two tracks right up against each other. It's so obvious that it's taking inspiration from Weezer and the like, and it's just taking it one step further. Also, you're starting to hear some of those very iconic horns that tend to be associated with later stage indie rock. You're just hearing the entirety of the indie rock sound come together. The wailing and the complaining is going up, which is great because, again, it's just that revolution light. It's not aggressively angry. Like if you compare this up to Vincent Come On Down, which came out the same exact year by Brainiac as this track did, Friend is a four-letter word. They don't sound anything alike, do they? But both are counterculture in their own way. One is aggressively angry post-punk counterculture, and the other one is just singing about life. It's singing about relationships and the indie counterculture way of living one's life as a hipster in 1996, but it's emotionally available. It's not angry. It's not crackly. It's different, right? But it's definitely not just popular rock music at all. That's why it's an evolution off of Buddy Holly on the way to what comes next, which, again, 2 years later, fourth wave. So it's like every 2 years, we're hitting another wave. And with this one, it's Neutral Milk Hotel in the Aeroplane Over the Sea, Holland 1945. We talked about this during the 1998 episode. It's pretty quintessential indie rock, especially in the late stages. They've carried over the horns from Friend is a Four-Letter Word by Cake. It's even more waily and complainy than Cake's Friend is a Four-Letter Word was. It sounds even more nasally than Buddy Holly was. And it sounds nothing like Gimme Indie Rock at this point. Like it's its own thing. That's why it's fourth wave and the evolutions just keep hitting, right? They keep coming and keep coming. But this is obviously quintessential indie rock, isn't it? It's counterculture. They're going so deeply into retro rock ideas. They've even started to incorporate some of the crackly sounds, like from fourth wave alternative rock, which is interesting. So the fourth waves of alternative rock and indie rock started to have the crackle in them, which is interesting. But again, softer. The horns are in there. It's whinier. It's great. It's indie rock. And then finally, 1 year later, we actually get an aggressive leap into the fifth wave by the Magnetic Fields on their very, very long album, 69 Love Songs. I think there might even be 69 tracks on this album. And the track is All My Little Words. It's taking what In the Aeroplane Over the Seas, Holland 1945 by Neutral Milk Hotel is doing and takes it even one step further, right? Those horns starting to get minimized. We're starting to move into even more complex directions around what indie rock needs to be, what it could be. It's pulling even further away from what Buddy Holly sounds like. Buddy Holly sounds like alternative rock now by comparison to this. Indie rock is just continuing to soften and go deeper into those emotions, and the entire persona of the hipster is just becoming even more clearly defined by 1999. To a degree that I'd like to believe that by 1999, who was defining themselves as a hipster in 94 might think that what the persona that is being described and elicited in the Magnetic Fields is now a poser by comparison, or that the hipsters of 1999 think that the Buddy Holly hipsters are passé. I'm sure that there's probably starting to become some purity tests in the indie rock scene by 1999, 100%. And obviously what Neutral Milk Hotel was putting out there, whole different variety of hipsters. This is why shows like Portlandia are so rich with characters that look kind of different from each other, but all share some of the same ideals, because there were alternative rock people, there were indie rock people, there were garage rock people, there were the slowcore, sadcore, shoegaze people, and they were all kind of swirling around one another, but they all were so strident in their counterculture approach, and the purity tests were just 5-alarm fires all the time, which is why the show is so funny, and why the underground rock scene of the West was what it was, because everybody was coming out with this really great music and nobody could agree on how to best counter culture. It was just a funny moment for the 90s in music history. So that's the entirety of indie rock from end to end. It evolved quite a bit, didn't it? From Gimme Indie Rock all the way to All My Little Words. Very distinctive, different sounds, but they all very naturally evolved from one end to the other. It's pretty amazing, isn't it? So then finally, we talk about slowcore, sadcore, shoegaze. And for the most part, you can imagine that we're basically picking up from where in the late 80s My Bloody Valentine had started things, and we're just going further in that direction. So when we talk about slowcore, sadcore, and shoegaze, I think slowcore and shoegaze were probably first, and then sadcore came in right behind it, but they're all approximately the same. And the reason we call them all these things is because this version of counterculture was taking hardcore punk music and just slowing it all the way down, where punk music and post-punk and hardcore punk quintessentially go super fast. Like, these tracks are really short, they hit you real hard, and then they're over. There was just this decision by a few select artists around the 88, 89, 90 time frame that they were just going to play things super duper slow and draw it out and make it painful. Like, where hardcore punk music was like a fast and furious fist fight, slowcore, sadcore, and shoegaze are like vivisection. Like, it's just unnecessary amounts of painful surgery with no anesthesia. And it's just these slow, drawn out notes and slow beats. Each beat is really far away from one another, and the singing is quiet and slow, and sometimes it's intense, but for the most part it sounds super lazy, which is to say too that I'm sure that the influence of slowcore, sadcore, shoegaze on alternative rock getting from the second to the third wave was palpable and real, and also it was more than likely influencing the softening of alternative rock into indie rock. All of those things were probably happening. I'm absolutely certain of that. So to get us started, we're going to begin with a proto version of slowcore, sadcore, shoegaze in 1990 by Toad the Wet Sprocket on their album Pale, and the track is Torn, and I'm pretty sure we talked about this album in 1990. So the reason that this is still pre-first wave is that it's still got 80s elements to it. It's still got some early alternative rock ideas thrown in there. I also don't think it's necessarily all the way cooked yet. Like, it's not as slow as it needs to be. And I think that this is more reactionary to the hardcore scene versus it being its own distinctive thing finally. So I think it's on the way, but it's not totally there yet. But it definitely is slower. It's definitely a commentary on the hardcore scene. It's pretty obvious. And the shoegaze is still trying to come into its own. So the singing is quiet, it's slow, it's contemplative, but it's not quite all the way there yet. But this is aggressive experimentation for sure. But then by 1991, we move into My Bloody Valentine, in which I guess they've figured it out by then, and they're declaring the position on this new movement of the cores and the gazes on their album Loveless, and the track is Only Shallow. And you can really hear the screeching, wailing guitars. It's still slow, and the notes are still drawn out, but they're starting to layer on one another and overlap and envelop one another, and it's becoming this whole entire rich sound that is slow and droning around the steady stream of these wailing hard guitars, where Torn, by comparison, again, it wasn't fully realized. This sounds far more realized, like the perspective is clearer here, and it doesn't sound necessarily like Gimme Indie Rock, right, which also came out in 1991, or Puke and Cry by Dinosaur Jr., also 1991. This sounds totally different. It sounds like its own thing. It's a different way to approach counterculture. So then 2 years later, we get to the second wave of slowcore, sadcore, shoegaze on Souvlaki by Slowdive, and the track is Allison. So we definitely talked about this track and this album in the 93 episode, because Slowdive's Souvlaki is an amazing album. It sounds even more cohesive than what Only Shallow by My Bloody Valentine was doing. The perspective is clear. You could obviously still hear that, not even wall of sound, it's like a castle of sound. It's the Great Wall of China of sound, where it's just these echoey, droning guitars, droning vocals. It all just sounds like a massive blur, doesn't it? But it's evolved, right? It's coming in waves. It's not like how My Bloody Valentine was these sharp peaks and valleys of the sound. Allison sounds like it's a softer wave that's just rolling and rolling and rolling. And it doesn't hardly sound anything like what hardcore punk music might have sounded like back in the day. Again, it's its own perspective and it sounds very distinctive. Great album, by the way. Can't say it enough. And then we have to wait actually 6 years later before we get to a third wave in 1999 with the album Low Birth Weight by Piano Magic, and the track is Snow Fall Soon. It took a long time for us to get there. I mean, it's slowcore, sadcore, shoegaze. I guess it was just going to take its sweet time to get to the next wave, the next idea. And Snowfall Soon has softened considerably. Like now it's not the Great Wall of China. It's back down to just being kind of a normal wall of sound. But it's more refined. It's got an even stronger perspective, as if to say we've edited the ideas that Slow Dive we're playing with, or My Bloody Valentine we're playing with, or even Toad the Wet Sprocket we're playing with. We've edited it down. We've gotten it down to its essential pieces. And now we're just driving forward with this much more refined, distinctive idea in how we're approaching the cores and gazes subgenre. Just listen to that. Listen to how the progression goes from Torn to Only Shallow to Allison to Snowfall Soon. And they are all connected, absolutely connected, but Snowfall Soon and Torn don't really sound very much like each other, with the exception of a couple little historical artifacts. Snowfall Soon like it's going into the future, and Torn sounds like it's stuck back in the 80s. It's a really interesting, cool evolution, and I really did enjoy going on the slowcore, sadcore, shoegaze journey because of just how different it was in their approach to counterculture, right? Because if you listen to The Banana Question in 98, Water Park in 99, All My Little Words in 99, and then Snowfall Soon in 99, all those four subgenres, final stages for the 90s, they don't sound inherently similar. The Banana Question and Water Park sound kind of similar for obvious reasons because it's Royal Trucks, but they're still distinctive. They still have their own different approaches, and just totally different ways to approach counterculture. How fun is that? There was a lot to rebel against apparently in the 1990s. So the amount of counterculture music in the rock space was just undeniable. And like I said, there was enough of it that was great that we had to separate it out between the popular rock this time around. So who can say what the 2000s is going to give us? Is it going to give us more of this or less? I'm excited to find out. So having said that, what did you agree with? Did you agree with my progression on alternative rock? Do you disagree that alternative rock led to garage and indie rock? Maybe. Do you agree that I've lumped together slowcore, sadcore, and shoegaze, or do you think that they should all be separate and I shouldn't have been merging them all together into one kind of cohesive conglomeration idea this whole time? Maybe. What did I miss? Did I miss any of the distinctive offshoot underground counterculture rock movements? It's possible. I'm sure that there was some further experimentation that was going on that was flying below my radar that I didn't pick up on that is even more nuanced, or hopefully I didn't miss any gigantic stuff. That would be unfortunate. I'd like to believe that between this episode and then the Western Popular Rock episode for the 90s, I've basically captured the entire rock scene for the decade. But if I have missed something, I would love to hear about it, because of all the different major genre groups in the 1990s, rock music was the most important. Kind of like how new wave and metal music were the most important for the 80s, rock music was for the 90s. So if I've missed something in the rock space for the 1990s, please tell me so, because I want to make sure that we are all getting that full spectrum understanding of what the heck was going on in rock music in the 90s, because there was a ton of it and it was all great. What'd you learn? Did you learn the progressions of indie rock? That it started way back in the very beginning of the 90s and had an entire run across the decade, and that indie rock didn't necessarily just start in the 2000s with late stage Death Cab for Cutie? Did you learn that? Did you learn that garage rock started happening before White Stripes got their hands into it? Did you learn about all the different progressions of alternative rock from the second to the fourth, even more distinctly than how I laid it out across the whole decade? Or the different progressions of sadcore, slowcore, shoegaze? Did you learn more about that? Hopefully. I learned a lot. I would say that for as much as I learned going through the season itself, doing this recap series has furtherly educated me on how these counterculture rock movements aggressively evolved over time. And it was just a real joy to go through. So I learned a lot too. So as a reminder, if you're interested in listening to any of the music that I talked about in today's episode, make sure that you check out the playlist that I've linked in the description here of the episode. As well, if you are looking for my big playlist for the 1990s, it'll drop when my last episode for this series drops, so keep a lookout for that. Please join us again. there's a few more episodes left in this recap series, so make sure that you join us again for those as well when we get to season 3, when we're talking about the 2000s. Make sure that you rate us and comment wherever you're listening to us so that other people can find us more easily. Make sure that you find us on Instagram at Not Scary Just Music Pod, and make sure that you subscribe so that when we drop the rest of these episodes in this series, and then eventually the 90s recap big playlist, make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss when those drop, so you can go listen to them and enjoy them. As well, when we start up season 3 for the 2000s, make sure that you're subscribed on social media and wherever you're listening to us so that you don't miss when those episodes drop. Make sure that you tell everybody, tell your friends, tell your family, tell everybody, tell people you know and don't know, tell random people on the bus, tell people in the grocery store, tell everybody. Because we already talked about Western popular rock music, but I'm sure that at least some of this music that we talked about here in the counterculture underground scene went under the radar for a lot of people. Like, I know that Modest Mouse is super popular, Weezer's super popular, Nutrimilk Hotel has found its footing in the popular spaces. Pavement, again, kind of an underground hero. Dinosaur Jr. similarly. Royal Trucks, always a good opportunity to put them on a platform, but some of these artists did fly pretty far below the radar for a lot of people, and so being able to put them in front of others and just show them this other side to 90s rock music and how counterculture was thriving despite the fact that grunge sounded like it was resisting culture to a certain extent. The reality is that compared to some of this other stuff, it was culture. Smashing Pumpkins, Pearl Jam, even Radiohead, Nirvana, they were culture. But there were other artists that were flying even further below the radar that were so indie and you've never heard of them, right? There's definitely that crowd. Like, the hipster crowd came about because of this stuff, not because of grunge, not because of Radiohead. They came about because of this counterculture right here. So because of that, always a joy and an opportunity to introduce people to even more of this underground stuff, even though I'd like to believe it's a lot less mysterious than it used to be probably. Like in the 90s, this was probably much further underground. And these days, a lot less so. But it's just another thing for people to appreciate and enjoy. So tell everybody. And the interesting thing, too, that I'll say is that for some people that are interested in counterculture rock music of the 90s, let's just say, they might not necessarily have been committed to all of these, right? Because there were these very undeniable purity tests among these different splinter groups within counterculture rock music in the 90s and the 2000s as a competition to figure out who could be more counterculture, who could be listening to the more underground music that you've never heard of before. And so because of that, did it become a little bit inaccessible for some people, even people that were interested in underground music but weren't as underground or hardcore in the scenes as some other people? And as a result, it became this competition on who knew more about the more obscure band or sound? Yeah, totally. And as a result, did it make the experience kind of suck in the moment? Absolutely. I hated the 90s underground scene because it just felt like a never-ending game in which I could never win. And I really enjoyed a lot of the music, but it just seemed inaccessible because I didn't know as much, or I couldn't go toe-to-toe with some of these other music files of the moment. And so did it put me off a little bit? And it took a lot of time for me to come back to some of this music when I felt like it was more of a safe space that I could just enjoy it in my own capacity. And I felt more comfortable with the idea of not knowing everything and just appreciating and enjoying the music for what it was without it having to be a competition with other hipsters. Yeah. And you know what I had to tell myself in order to feel better about it? I had to say, SJ, look, this music is really great. And it's not scary, right? It's just counterculture underground rock music. Thanks for listening, everybody.